Tigana, 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 Tigana. Whoop, Tigana. Because to describe what this book is about could very well take the whole video, here is what the back of the book would say if I had a physical copy. Tigana is the internationally celebrated epic of a beleaguered country struggling to be free. It is the tale of a people so cursed by the dark sorceries of the tyrant king Brandon that even the very name of their once beautiful home cannot be spoken or remembered. But years after their homeland's devastation, a handful of men and women set in motion a dangerous crusade to overthrow their conquerors and bring back to the world the lost brightness of an obliterated name, Tigana. What the blurb doesn't mention is that there are in fact two tyrants. Both are powerful sorcerers and rivals. They've each taken a slice of the palm in battle. The palm in this instance is modelled after the boot of Italy. It's divided up into many provinces, and both tyrants have a slice of those provinces. Each tyrant has a different motivation for wanting to hold on to power. One, Alberico, just wants power for the sake of power, and the other, Brandon, who's the one who is attempting to rid this whole world of the memory of an entire place and culture, wants revenge upon Tigana for the death of his son. Apparently these are now the two tyrants. Are we down with that? Because it's happening. Anyway, the two main people who are going to try and right these wrongs have been directly impacted by Brandon. They are from Tigana and they are just old enough to have lived through the wars and remember what happened, but neither of them were old enough to take part in the conflict. And they are joined by two young adults who had no idea about Tigana. Their families never mentioned them and they've only just found out that Tigana existed. So they drop everything, absolutely everything, their whole lives to go on this quest to try and connect to their heritage and to save these roots and maybe heal their families whose lives were absolutely turned upside down by Tigana's erasure. The themes in the book run really deep. There is a brief bit at the back of the book that delves into the real life places and histories that helped form this story. I think there's possibly more of it online. I'll see if I can find it. That is the summary of the book. So now we're going to talk about my reaction to it because I can't remember how I came across Tigana. I thought it was a fairly modern fantasy written in the last few years. It's been on my Kindle for a while, so when I finally leapt into it, I had no clue as to what the book was about at all. When I read the prologue, I really thought that this was going to be my new favourite book. The writing style was just so on point and the characters just seemed to come alive on the page. The foreshadowing and effortless conjuring up of surroundings and characters without seemingly being made descriptive at all made me genuinely excited. However, Chapter 1, we're introduced to new characters, we don't know who they are, and they disappear to be replaced by others, and a few people have the same descriptor. I don't know if they're supposed to be the same person or not, because a dark-haired guy with a bit of grey in his hair does not help me much. And it takes me a long time to get into a multi-character story at the best of times, but this one was a bit rockier. I think perhaps a reread would clarify some of these things. It did settle down after a bit. Unfortunately for me, they settled with the Devon. I didn't like Devon that much, mostly for his initial interactions with Catriona and then because of the way his motivations were written. He, minor spoiler, did a big thing, because a dream inspired him to. I do not like this particular trope at the best of times, but there felt like a few other reasons shoehorned in and I almost did not finish it right there and then. It took me several days to kind of drag back the mental energy to keep going. After all, I did like the prologue and the writing was still really good. And there were other characters I did like, so I was kind of a little invested, but yeah, it was touch and go there at the beginning. It did take me a very long time to even remotely care about Devon, but once he was set on his path and not manoeuvring onto it, he did grow on me a bit, especially as he matured as a character. Although I did get a different kind of nervous about one of the characters, Tommaso, because in this world you are looked down upon for being gay, and I'm not familiar with this author at all, so I was worried about how Tommaso would be handled and treated. I have been burned this way by other authors, so he was treated badly in this world. And there is a scene in particular that was very bad for Tommaso, but the way he was written and his arc was covered was absolutely excellent. I would put a trigger warning in for this, but it was still good. And on the back of this character's arc and the way he was written, I trusted that the author knew what he was doing, and I let myself be lulled into the story. The story is told from the point of view of many characters. Some we only see from the outside, which is an effective tool because you only get to see what these characters mean to other people, or it deepens the mystery of that character, or perhaps a bit of both. There are a few main players and their connections to each other get revealed throughout the book, and there's always something to reveal, always just something peeled back, which is quite nice. I do love how the two tyrants are written. One is a baddie bad guy who is just bad, and we see from his point of view, which means that we see his actions and reactions, but we are left knowing how these actions are the steady drip of him feeding fuel to his own rebellion, which is just nice. And the other is Brendan, who is a baddie bad guy, who, you know, the one who obliterated the entire identity of Tigana, but we get to see the nuance and humanity of him through a woman called Dianora, and it's her story that intrigued me most throughout the entire book. She is a member of his Saishan. I don't know if I'm saying any of these words right, and I'm very sorry if I'm not. Even though she's one of the victims of this tyrant's rage against Tigana, he doesn't know. And her feelings towards the tyrant and her backstory, the way it was written, I found utterly compelling reading. She was definitely my favourite throughout the whole book. Another one of the things that this book did well is that the first time we are truly shown magic used, we are shown its flaws. So we know, despite what's about to be revealed, that there are consequences to the magic used in this world, which I do love me, a magic system with consequences. Especially when you know that there are two very powerful people in the story, it helps to know that there is a chance, however small, that they can be tricked or beaten. In fact, at this stage of the book, I really liked the way that the women were written. They had their own motives and characters and autonomy. I saw a few people say the spice scenes were weird, and now I don't like to read books with a lot of spice. But this book didn't even really blip my spice radar, and that's because the scenes never felt like they were intended to be about the spice itself, but more about getting comfort where they could. The only bit that made me raise 2 eyebrows was the incest scene, because that was a thing that happened, but it was also written in a way that felt true to the story. However, later in the book, it gets put in weird places and just sprung on you like, ta-da, spice, for no reason, and it's just awkward. Then there are the deeper themes, which I don't feel qualified to talk about in depth. The themes of losing culture and name and identity. This is the core of the book and the main heart of it. In fact, this book has elements taken from real places and events, which really gave a really strong feeling of the real despite the magical aspect of it. However, and this is a trigger warning for racism, at about the 40% mark, a group of characters needed a disguise, and one of them they disguised as a black man. They dyed his skin black. Yeah. Here's where I thought to check the age of the book, and it's 34 years old. 34 years. I thought it was 10 years old max, but it does explain why the author felt confident using this as a plot device. If I had known how old this was, it wouldn't have come as such a surprise, but it's quite something that I made it to 40% of this book before I even questioned its age. And this character wanders around in his disguise for the rest of the book. I was hoping that the author would subvert my expectations and make it clear that this wasn't a thing that was okay to do. He didn't. I will say that of all the dated books that I've read, this author never wrote a character as a caricature or dehumanized anyone. So all in all, I'm glad I continued with the book, but I very nearly did not finish the story right then and there, again. I did try to find black booktubers and other booktubers of colour who had read and reviewed Tigana. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I didn't find any. So if you know anyone who has, please let me know in the comments. But I did see reviews left by people who said that this book helped them with cultural displacement, which is not something I can comment on. But these remarks made me feel like this was a story I should continue with. Unfortunately, when I came to find some of those reviews again for reference, I couldn't find any, because of course I couldn't. But I had continued on by that point, and whilst we're on the issues, the further I got into the book, the more the fact that all the main women characters at least, were constantly referred to as pretty and beautiful, as if it were a moral virtue, grated. But then again, It was a dated book, so it grated less than perhaps it would if it was a modern day one. Although it was done a little in the beginning, it seemed to get a bit more heavy-handed as the story goes on, and it did kind of make me go, ugh, a bit. Also, as the book progresses, the relationships and spice scenes were, well, they felt like they'd been added in as an afterthought. It was just really odd, like hammered in, like, oh, I need a sex scene here for reasons, and it's going to be awkward. At this point, I was at the 60% mark, and so much had happened, I felt like I'd read 6 books, and my Kindle told me I still had more than 6 hours of reading left. Joy. However, the last 40% of the book actually flew by. Dianora's storyline remained my favourite throughout the book, and I did start to like and even enjoy Devon's story arc. All in all, I think I might read this again now knowing what I know, because I feel like I would enjoy at least 90% of it 1,000 times more now that I'm not so wary of what's coming in the book and that I'm aware of the author's intent. There are scenes and phrasings I would just like to obliterate from the book. The disguise scene and all the mentions of very pretty women for a start. I would not recommend this book to anybody without warning them that this was in there. However, I thought Tigana's writing was pretty consistently excellent. Its themes ran deep and were thoughtfully covered, the perspectives of the characters were really well chosen, and there was usually always a reason for a thing to have happened. Its world building was super strong, and I loved the folklore and magic aspect. The characters were well defined, even though there were issues, especially with the spice scenes, especially with the relationship writing. Yeah. But what makes me most excited is that people say his later writing is even better and doesn't contain these issues. So sign me up, basically. So do you have a Guy Gavriel Kay book or series that you would recommend? Is there a place I should start? Let me know in the comments, and stay spiffy. And if you want to see more reviews, etc., give the notification bell some ears and you'll get, notifications.